The time is at hand.
From the land between the crackheads in Williamson, West Virginia, you're in Dark Places. My name is Junebug Fugit. Howdy. I mentioned on the last episode that I've been on vacation, so the night that I recorded that, I was going to the big city of Pikeville, Kentucky with Brandon. We spent a lot of time over there because there's nothing to do here. And we were on the way and the exhaust fell off my car, dragging the road, scraping the ground. So I had to get a tow truck, and the few plans that I did have for my vacation got kind of shattered because no car. It's been sitting at some shop for the last 3 or 4 days and they haven't even looked at it yet. Great service.
This is Mr. Haunted, your In Dark Places news correspondent, with breaking news. Blue Origin mission with all-female crew, including Katy Perry, completes space trip. Blue Origin's all-female crew, which included pop star Katy Perry, completed their trip into space Monday morning. The flight lasted around 11 minutes and traveled more than 60 miles above Earth. According to Blue Origin, passing the Kármán line, which at 62 miles above sea level is considered to be the boundary between Earth's atmosphere and outer space. Along with Perry, the crew included Blue Origin owner Jeff Bezos' journalist fiancée, Lauren Sanchez, who was also a helicopter pilot. Journalist Gail King, former NASA rocket scientists Aisha Bowe, bioastronautics research scientist and civil rights activist Amanda Yin, and filmmaker Carrie Ann Flynn rounded out the crew. Upon landing back on Earth and exiting the capsule, Perry raised her hand triumphantly in the sky and kissed the ground. Speaking after touchdown, Perry said she brought a daisy with her into space to honor her 4-year-old daughter, Daisy, whom she shares with fiancé Orlando Bloom. "I feel super connected to love," Perry said. "I think this experience has shown me how much love is inside of me." In a separate interview, King said that Perry sang "What a Wonderful World" while the group was in space. Oprah Winfrey, who is King's best friend, was in the crowd watching the launch. So Oprah Winfrey was in the crowd watching the launch and removed her glasses and wept when the capsule touched down. King, who has said she's afraid of flying, kissed the ground as she climbed out of the capsule, thanking Jesus and then Bezos, because they're astronauts. And here's a few songs that are actually longer than this heroic, historic astronaut flight. Pink Floyd, "Shine On You Crazy Diamond," is 3 minutes longer than the astronaut's journey. The Doors' "The End" is 2 minutes longer than the astronaut's journey. And let's get one more here. Iron Maiden, "Rime of the Ancient Mariner," is 3 minutes longer than the heroic journey of these astronauts. This is how we all feel in our hearts today. Thank God they made it. This is Mr. Haunted for In Dark Places Breaking News. Back to you, Junebug.
Thanks, Jimmy. Found a lot of good memes about that little situation there. I went to the zoo yesterday, so does that mean I'm a koala bear? Katy Perry kissing the ground when they landed. Look like pigeons when I eat croissant outdoors. I get stuck in drive-through lines that last longer than that. When she kissed the ground like that, it's kind of like me whenever my car is sitting on empty and I just barely make it to the gas station in time. But yeah, there's been some good memes. But that's not why you called. This week on the show, we have USOs, unidentified submerged objects. USOs refer to unidentified flying objects which can allegedly travel through water. In the summer of 1980, the crew of the Saba Seahorse tugboat saw a mysterious object floating on the water off the coast of Brazil. It seemed to be signaling by turning on various colored lights, and soon after a UFO descended. Slowly, the two objects linked up, and then, as one, rose and swept out to sea. Did the crew witness a rescue operation of a USO by a UFO? An unfathomable mystery. Everyone has heard of unidentified flying objects, but what about unidentified submerged objects? A growing number of reports about USOs led Janet and Colin Board to investigate this phenomenon. On the evening of July 30th, 1967, Jorge Montoya was officer on duty on the Argentina ship Naviero as it steamed in the South Atlantic, 120 miles from the Brazilian coast. The off-duty officer and crew were below having their evening meal, and all was calm and as it should be. Glancing over to the starboard side, Montoya was suddenly startled to see a strange cigar-shaped craft gliding silently through the water 50 feet away. He stared in amazement for a moment and then alerted the captain on the intercom. When Captain Julian Ardanza arrived on the deck, the mysterious vessel was still running alongside his ship. The two men studied it for some 15 minutes as it held its position. The mysterious vessel glowed with a brilliant bluish-white light and left no wake. They estimated its length to be about 105 to 110 feet. Then, without any warning, the unidentified vessel turned toward the merchant ship and, glowing brilliantly as it accelerated, it dived beneath the ship and rapidly disappeared into the ocean depths. The officers and crew of the Navarro had just witnessed one of the enigmatic unidentified submerged objects, USOs. In a subsequent press interview, the captain said that it was certainly no commercial submarine nor a whale, and during 20 years at sea he had never seen anything like it. The number of UFO sightings recorded since the late 1940s runs into tens of thousands, and the reports that have been collected suggest that USOs are almost as numerous in the waters of this planet as are UFOs in the skies. More than 70% of the Earth's surface is covered with water. The average depth of the seas and oceans is 2 miles, and man has barely begun to explore the vast area that lies beneath the surface. Here, technologically advanced beings would find an ideal place to which to pursue their activities, well away from the sight of men. Just as diligent researchers have unearthed reports of UFOs that predate the 1947 sightings, believed by many to be the first, so there are reports of USOs from the past century. On the night of February 24th, 1885, in the North Pacific, the crew of the ship Interwitch watched as a huge object glowing with a brilliant red light dived into the sea, throwing up a large volume of water as it sank below the waves. On November 12th, 1887, near Cape Race, Newfoundland, Captain Moore of the British ship Siberian watched for 5 minutes as a large ball of fire rose from the ocean to a height of 50 feet. It moved toward his ship and against the prevailing wind before it departed. These and many other reports suggest that USOs can sometimes become UFOs, and vice versa. One of the most dramatic cases in USO files occurred on the night of July 26, 1980. The tugboat Sayaba Seahorse, I think that's how you say that, was on a routine journey when 60 miles from the Brazilian coast near Natal, the first mate was suddenly aware of a gray object 30 feet in diameter floating on the surface straight ahead. At the same time, a bright light could be seen over the sea rapidly approaching them. The first mate quickly changed direction to avoid a collision with the floating object, which then turned on various colored lights, yellow, red, green, and blue. The bright light had now reached them and could be seen as a glowing oval body hovering silently about 200 feet above the floating USO. The tugboat's engines were stopped, and the crew watched with fear and fascination as the UFO slowly descended onto the floating USO. A link-up took place. The USO lights went out, and the two bodies rose together. After hovering for some minutes in the area, the UFO, with its load, swept rapidly out to sea. This event naturally prompted a high-level investigation by the naval authorities, and much speculation from the Brazilian civilian ufologists. Did the tugboat crew witness a rescue operation of one UFO by another? Or was it a more routine pickup at a prearranged location? No conclusion could be reached, but whatever the naval authorities found out, they kept to themselves. USOs have also been sighted off the North American coast. One witness being 19-year-old Wesley Grumman, who was driving to Oak Bluff, Massachusetts on the evening of March 27, 1979. Noticing a green glow over the top of some sand dunes, he looked toward the sea as soon as his view of it was unobstructed. Some 200 feet offshore, a 30-foot long luminous cylinder was floating on the water. Grumman stopped his car as the USO silently rose from the surface, and he got out to watch its ascent. He decided to get his powerful hand lamp from his car, also known as a flashlight, but found he could move only his head. This paralysis lasted until the USO had flown out of sight, and Grumman also reported two other odd effects. The first was a low-frequency hum that his AM car radio had emitted during the sighting, and the second was the behavior of his wristwatch. This hand-wound calendar model had been 3 days ahead with this date before his experience, but the next day it was showing the correct date, and has done since then. At Newport, Rhode Island, John Gallagher observed during daylight hours something unidentified that was lifted or propelled from the sea. In April 1961, he was working on a house by the beach and noticed a red sphere bobbing on the waters. Intrigued, he went to the second floor for a better view, and he could see that it was about 200 yards offshore and drifting seawards. Suddenly, it rose steadily to a height of about 60 feet, stopped, and then, accelerating to about 100 miles per hour, moved with an undeviating flight out to sea. Gallagher was sure he had not seen a balloon, for its movements and speed had not been those of an object being blown by the wind, but of one under intelligent control. The unidentified submerged objects also extend their activities to inland waters. There are reports of them seen entering and leaving lakes, rivers, harbors, and creeks. There was a mass sighting on the Araguaia River in Brazil in November 1980, when more than 70 people who were waiting for a ferry saw a solid object 15 feet in diameter rise from under the water. For some 4 minutes, it hovered at a height of 650 feet and then slowly moved out to sea. At one point, it moved to within 100 feet of the bank. The man who saw a typical flying saucer rise from the Thompson River near Kamloops, British Columbia, Canada, wished to remain anonymous. So let's respect his wishes, please. But he is known as a reliable individual to Dr. J. Allen Hynek, world-renowned UFO authority. On the sunny afternoon of May 16, 1981, the witness was quietly fishing when, with a noise like water being poured into a hot frying pan, the strange craft emerged from the frothing water about 100 yards offshore. Then, with a rapid acceleration, it zoomed up over his head and quickly flew away. As it did, so there was a pattering sound, as pellets of something from the object rained down around him. He collected some of this material, which was taken for analysis by the Center for UFO Studies in Illinois. But, as with the Saibo Seahorse incident, no results were immediately forthcoming. The driver and passengers of a London bus had a front seat view when a silver cigar-shaped USO dived into the River Lee after cutting through telephone wires and gouging a scar in the concrete bank. Bob Fall was driving his number 123 bus toward Tottenham on April 13, 1964, when the USO dived across the road in front of him and landed in the river. The police, who found nothing when they dragged the 6-foot-deep river, suggested that the witnesses may have seen a flight of ducks. Yeah, that seems likely. But that still does not explain broken wires and damaged concrete. See there? Another impossible USO was observed in the St. Lawrence River near the city of Quebec, Canada, in March of 1965. For 4 or 5 minutes, Captain Claude Lauren of the Quebecair and his co-pilot could see the submarine lying below the surface over 200 miles from the open sea, a situation that would be extremely hazardous for an ordinary submersible. May 23, 1969, 3 eyewitnesses watched a round, shining object with flashing red lights dive into the St. Lawrence. A police search found nothing. The possibility that some UFOs, after the supersonic flight through the atmosphere, need to cool their overheated structures is persuasively supported by the following report. In the summer of 1967, a clubmaster and his assistant were camping with their cub pack on the shore of a quiet lake 20 miles from St. John, New Brunswick, Canada. The boys were asleep, and the 2 men had walked down to the lake to fetch water. Down through the dusk came a UFO shaped like 2 saucers, or plates, placed face to face, with lights flashing red, orange, green, and blue around its edge. As it touched the water and sank there with a sizzling noise, reminiscent of the sound reported by the man who saw a UFO rise from the Kamloops River in 1981. The lake contained clear, cold water and was fed by mountain snows, but when the men looked at it the next morning, it was quite muddy and felt lukewarm. Not many people spend their nights outdoors on lakes, but those who do may see strange sights, as did Mr. and Mrs. Boards, who on the night of September 16, 1955, were fishing on the Titicus Reservoir in New York State. By 1:30 a.m., they had no luck. Then Mrs. Boards saw a pink, luminous sphere rise from the water and splash back in again. A short while later, back on shore, they saw a dark shape out on the water. It had 2 white horizontal streaks of light at its base and a pale yellow revolving light above. Mr. Boards, more curious than afraid, rowed toward the lights, and they retreated at a faster rate. Then they came toward him, and he in turn rowed away. His wife did not like the situation at all, so they rowed a mile to the mooring stage, the lights following at a distance. As they drove off in their car, the lights were still visible on the reservoir. Reservoirs seem to be of particular interest to UFOs and USOs, and there are many reports of their activity over and in such waters. Speculation among researchers runs the gamut from the suggestion that they are monitoring the pollution to which humanity subjects itself, to the belief that they are systematically doping our drinking water for reasons best known to themselves. The power of these enigmatic machines, if machines they are, seems to be immense, as the following reports from the ice-clad waters of Sweden indicate. On April 30th, 1976, between 5:15 and 5:30 p.m., 3 witnesses watched a 30-foot-long, dark gray object plowed across Lake Siljan in central Sweden, cutting a channel through the 8-inch thick ice. The channel was 10 to 12 feet wide and ran across the lake for more than half a mile. As the USO ripped through the ice at about 60 miles per hour, ice blocks and water cascaded up on either side. 8 years earlier, on April 5th, 1968, the Times reported that something incredibly powerful had smashed a huge hole through the ice covering a lake in central Sweden, but scientists and military experts are uncertain about what it was. 2 local police had found the hole, which was 700 square yards in the area near Malling. Leading the investigation was Colonel Kurt Hermanson, who said that an aircraft crash was out of the question, as there were no traces around the hole, only big blocks of ice which had been thrown up, indicating that whatever went through the lake was incredibly powerful. The fact that the 3-foot thick ice had been thrown up suggests that, in view of the USO activity that had been logged, something incredibly powerful may have come up from below, but who can be certain? Divers who went down could find nothing on the muddy lake bottom to explain the mystery. A few days later, another large hole was discovered in the ice covering a lake at Cerna, and that too remained a mystery. It is not surprising that the authorities assumed that the holes had been made by objects falling into the water. For years, the Scandinavians had been plagued by unidentified flying objects falling from the skies into their lakes. A great many of these occurred in 1946 and were first dubbed meteors by the press, but when reports of silver torpedo-shaped projectiles emitting trails of smoke continued to be made, very often several reports a day, they were termed ghost rockets. The first assumption was that these were captured German V-2 rockets being tested by the Russians, but these speculations were not borne out by the facts. Although the German Peenemünde rocket development complex had been occupied by the Russians in May of 1945, the German scientists had already surrendered to the American forces, leaving the testing facilities completely wrecked. It would not have been possible for Russian scientists to start assembling and firing V-1s or V-2s in the time available, let alone develop and build hundreds of new rockets with flight characteristics quite different from those of the V-2. A typical ghost rocket report was made on July 19, 1946, by a family group who reported that, with a noise like a mighty wind, 2 rockets, 7 feet long, and with stubby 3-foot wings halfway down their bodies, swept overhead and dived into Lake Mjøsa, 60 miles north of Oslo in Norway. A crater could be seen at the bottom of the lake, but dredging by the military authorities found nothing. The ghost rockets were tracked on radar, as they made abrupt changes of direction, but they were rarely seen to crash. But when they did, they always crashed into a lake, yet no traces of wreckage were ever found, despite intensive searches by troops. They claim they're astronauts now. Okay, so I rode in a plane, and now I'm a pilot. My dog rides in the car. Is he now a chauffeur? Okay. The alien fleet. From the vast expanses of the world's oceans come reports of mysterious underwater entities that are as intriguing as UFOs. Janet and Colin Board describe more spectacular sightings of unidentified submerged objects. Since the end of the Second World War, the navies of the world have frequently tracked large submarine craft whose performance is greatly superior to anything that they themselves possess. In common with unidentified submerged objects, USOs, these mystery craft seem to congregate in particular areas of this planet, 2 of the most notable being the Scandinavian waters and off the eastern coast of South America. With the mention of submarines in Scandinavian offshore waters, many readers will probably remember the incident of autumn 1981 when a Russian captain ran his submarine ashore at Karlskrona, Sweden, due to faulty navigation. Undoubtedly, the Russians like to keep themselves informed about the navies of other nations and keep track of their exercises and activity. And some of the unidentified submarines that have been located have doubtless been Russian. But just as the Russians were originally blamed for the Swedish ghost rockets of 1946, so may they equally unjustifiably have been blamed for many of the mysterious submarines reported since the 1950s. The performance and behavior of some of these USOs exceed those of conventional Navy craft in the same way that Earth's aircraft are outperformed by UFOs. The maximum speed of the latest submarine can achieve about 40 knots or 50 miles an hour. But these mystery submarines have been detected traveling underwater at over 3 times that speed. On maneuvers in the North Atlantic in 1963, the United States aircraft carrier Wasp and 12 other vessels detected a huge underwater craft traveling at 150 knots or 175 miles an hour. Stayed with them for 4 days, maneuvering around them and diving to depths of 27,000 feet. The record depth for a dive by a known submarine is 6,250 feet. During July 1972, an unidentified submarine cruised off the coast of Chile, usually at a depth of 3,300 feet, far deeper than conventional submarines dive. For at this depth, the tremendous pressure presents a very real danger. Was it a Russian spy submarine that penetrated some 90 miles into the Norwegian fjords during November 1972? For 3 weeks, the Norwegian Navy, assisted by NATO ships and aircraft, hunted the mysterious intruder, which was repeatedly tracked underwater and lost again in the Sog Fjord. Several dozen ships plus helicopters took part in the hunt, and depth charges were systematically used, but the strange vessel could not be made to surface. On November 23rd, a large dark object was seen moving below the surface in the Luster Fjord, a branch of the main fjord, while at about the same time in the Arlands Fjord, another branch, a warship, tracked a submarine with sonar. That night, Martin Nilsson saw 6 red rockets fired into the sky from below the surface, while nearby, on an inaccessible peak overlooking the Arlands Fjord, red and green lights were seen flashing. On November 24th, the combined forces made a concerted attack with depth charges. The only result was that a very powerful but unknown jamming source opened up, completely disrupting all communications and rendering all radar and sonar inoperative. On November 27th, the Norwegian authorities stated that the mystery submarine had left, still unseen and unidentified. Similar incidents have occurred in other Norwegian fjords, in Swedish coastal waters, and around the coast of Greenland, usually in areas apparently devoid of military significance, but no vessels have ever been trapped, damaged, or positively identified. USOs are also seen in the lakes of Sweden. An object with what appeared to be a clear perspex dome was seen in Blåron Lake, Bohuslän. There were repeated sightings in Lake Rasvalen of an object more than 50 feet long, and from Stetsjen Lake in Östergötland, a USO with a conning tower was reported. We have reports from several other lakes of large dark bodies seen below the surface. Whether these are machines or monsters of the Loch Ness type is a matter for conjecture. Another USO hunt similar to the Norwegian one took place in February of 1960 in the Nuevo Gulf, when for 2 weeks the Argentinian Navy chased 2 mystery submarines originally assumed to be Russian, but their speed and maneuverability must have caused the authorities to think again. Due to the continual UFO and USO activity along this coastline, the locals were openly speaking of the Martians, who, they believed, operated from underwater bases. 8 months earlier in Buenos Aires harbor, the naval authorities had been having trouble with a large, fast, and very maneuverable USO that was shaped like a fish and was silver in color. Its distinctive feature was a large vertical tail fin, such as might be seen on an airliner. They knew what it looked like because they were able to send down divers to examine the craft, but they were not able to identify it. During 1978, there was a tremendous wave of UFO activity over Italy. More than 500 reports were made, and after all the errors and hoaxes had been eliminated, the figures still indicated that a tremendous amount of activity had taken place, which had risen to a peak in the last 3 months of the year. Along the Adriatic coastline, the unexplained phenomena included columns of water rising from calm seas to a height of 100 feet, red and white lights following fishing boats at night, USOs seen on or below the surface, emerging and diving into the sea, and electrical interference on radar, radio, and television equipment. Fishermen refused to go to sea without naval protection. On the evening of November 9th, Neo di Valentino, captain of an Italian naval boat sent to patrol the coast, saw, with 2 of his men, a bright red light emerge from the sea 1,100 yards away. It rose to a height of 1,000 to 1,300 feet, and then flew quickly away to the east. While this was happening, radio communication with the shore was disrupted. Many of the population spent the night hours watching for UFOs and USOs, and inevitably, some normal occurrences were thought to be of extraterrestrial origin. In the dawn light of December 7th in the Gulf of Venice, near Caral, hundreds of people who had been watching lights in the sea during the night saw with alarm strange craft and entities emerging from the water. This turned out to be a combined air/naval exercise with amphibious craft and troops. Not so easily explained is the experience of 3 French fishermen from the Mediterranean port of Le Brusque, who at 11 p.m. on August 1st, 1962, were out in their boats on a clear, calm night. About 330 yards away, a long metallic craft appeared, moving slowly on the surface. The men discussed it amongst themselves and agreed that it must be a submarine, though not the type they could identify. The water next to the craft became disturbed, and a dozen frogmen emerged from the water and climbed onto the strange submarine. The Frenchmen held them from across the water with a friendly greeting, but the strangers took no notice as they climbed inside the vessel until the last one was about to descend. Before doing so, he turned toward the fisherman and raised his right arm in acknowledgement. Then he too disappeared into the craft. The amazed fisherman watched the strange object rise into the air and hang just above the water. Red and green lights flashed, and it slowly started to revolve from left to right. As it did so, the body glowed with an orange light and, describing a graceful arc above the sea, accelerated rapidly into the sky until the glowing dot could no longer be distinguished. Similar night activities have been recorded elsewhere. Only a month earlier, in the Gulf of Catalina, south of Los Angeles, a chartered fishing boat skipper and his mate studied a strange vessel through their night glasses from 440 yards away. It appeared to be a submarine, low in the water, steel gray, and without markings. It carried an odd afterstructure around which 5 figures could be seen moving, apparently working on something. After a time, the mystery submarine started to move, and the fishing boat skipper had to take evasive action in order to avoid being run down. The strange vessel swept by them at high speed. It was noiseless and left no wake, but made a big swell in the water as it headed toward the open sea. The naval authorities were interested in the men's report. During an interview, showed them silhouettes of foreign submarines in an attempt at identification. The origin of these mysterious USOs and their amphibious crews remain unknown, but a clue to the purpose of their nocturnal activities might possibly be gained from some of the elusive artifacts that they may have left on the seabed in some locations. One example is a shiny metal cylinder, 23 feet long and 10 feet in diameter, that a Spanish aqualung diver found on the seabed on the Spanish Mediterranean coast in July 1970. The smooth, rivetless walls of the cylinder had no apparent opening, and as it was so clean it could hardly have been underwater for long. The next morning he returned to have another look, but the object was gone. He searched the area but could not find it. A similar object may have been found by Martin Malek, a treasure hunter, on the coast of Miami, Florida, in September 1966. Malek returned with 2 naval divers. Whether the object was salvaged or disappeared, like the Spanish object, we do not know. Air Force officials denied that it could have been a missile dropped by an aircraft. In April 1967, 2 Danish boys saw a UFO drop several objects into the Kattegat Strait near Sjellands Ode, 50 miles northeast of Copenhagen. Matter that was later recovered included lime and inorganic coal, combined in a manner completely unknown. Lawrence Johnson watched as a glowing cigar dropped 2 long objects into the waters of Namsend Ford in December 1959. Some while later, UFO investigators using sonar found an object 20 feet high, but at a depth of 300 feet. It was too difficult for the divers to reach. They did report that they could see wheel tracks on the bottom, leading out of the sea. Unidentified tracks, 3 feet wide, seemingly plowed by something resembling a globe, were found on a beach in Venezuela in August of 1967. 2 days later, 2 American scientists arrived to study the tracks and apparently found them of great interest. The UFO that was seen to land and take off from the sea at Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, in June 1970, left a red cylinder in the water, which was later collected by a police launch. Apparently, the governments of the world take a greater interest in these underwater activities than they wish to admit. But how much have they learned from the artifacts that they have salvaged is unknown. In 1970, Ivan T. Sanderson, biologist and founder of the Society for the Investigation of the Unexplained, published his book Invisible Residents, in which he presents some of the material that we have been examining. In it, he suggests that beneath the oceans could live a far older race than humankind, possibly descended from the life that did not leave the primeval seas to develop on land, but remained to develop more rapidly underwater. Being many millions of years ahead of humanity, they avoid direct contact with the primitive life, mankind, on the planet's surface, and have developed their technology to the point that they can now easily make interstellar journeys in their craft, which we know as UFOs and USOs. UFO researcher John Keel suggested that someone is operating a clandestine Air Force and Navy on this planet, and theorized that underwater bases may be in the regions above the Arctic Circle. The founders of the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization, APRO, Jim and Coral Lorenzen, suggest that USO phenomena are a result of the mapping and mining operations carried out by extraterrestrials who have arrived in UFOs from other planets. In 1973, the Argentine Society for the Investigation of Unusual Phenomena stated that following years of investigation and research, they now have no doubt that machines from another world have established undersea bases in the Gulfs of San Matias and San Jorge on the Patagonian coast. While in Venezuela, so many UFOs have been seen diving into and emerging from the Caribbean Sea that many people believe undersea bases exist, though opinions vary on whether these are in the ocean depths, the coastal shallows, or in great motherships lying on the seabed. The value of undersea bases for a technologically advanced but secretive civilization that may share our planet is obvious. But the underwater world is still a largely unknown environment, and as in so much of ufology, the proof continues to elude investigators.
Tired of the mainstream media spin? Want the truth, loud, clear, and unapologetically conservative? Seth's Conservative Podcast Show is your new Sunday night destination. Tune in at 7 p.m. every Sunday on Rewind the Indie for bold opinions, hot takes, and real talk that cuts through the noise. Politics, culture, common sense. If you're ready for a show that stands for faith, freedom, and the American way, this is it. Seth's Conservative Podcast Show. Sundays at 7, only on Rewindy Indie. Be there, or be misinformed.
That's my buddies Tracy and Seth. They got a show on the radio now. Check them out. It's pretty cool. I think my favorite one was, "Stop telling Katy Perry she's an astronaut. She already thinks she can sing." Oh yeah. That's about all of the USO stories for this week. Thanks for listening. We appreciate you. And thanks as always, Jimmy Haunted. We'll see you again right here next week. God bless.